We're back here on Good Night, and you saw from that video Article 5. And to talk about it, we're joined by Mike Arnold, the state director of the Convention of States in Massachusetts. Michael Arnold, nice to have you here on Good Night. Thanks for taking a couple minutes.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, I think it's important that you're here because I think people are starting to hear about the convention, but they probably don't understand it. It's a nonpartisan issue. It's not Democrat. It's not Republican. It affects everybody. So who better to talk about it than the state director? Tell us about it.
Well, what the convention is trying, the resolution is proposing to do is three things: spending limits, limit the power of the federal government, and term limits for federal, Senate and Congress. And those are the only three things that are going to be proposed for the convention. And all of the states that signed or passed the resolution have to pass the same language resolution. So far, 15 states have passed the resolution. Mississippi became number 15 yesterday. You want me to go through all 15 of them, tell you who they are?
Well, is Massachusetts or anybody on the East Coast of America?
Massachusetts is not one of them yet. So far, it's Georgia, Alaska, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Indiana, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arizona, North Dakota, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Utah, and yesterday, Mississippi.
And once again, how many states have to adopt it?
We need 2/3 to get the convention called, which is 34 states. We're at 15 now, so we're more than 40% of the way there, and things are picking up. There's some other ones that are coming up here relatively shortly, hopefully.
So what do you hear from most people? I mean, when you present this, and like I said, it was a nonpartisan issue, spending limits, term limits for elected officials. I mean, do you get any pushback from people when you present it, especially in a state like Massachusetts?
Yeah, a lot of people say that they're afraid we're going to have a runaway convention, but they don't understand this is not a constitutional convention. This is a convention of the states. And there have been over 30 state conventions in the history of our country, and none of them have ever run away. We're in more of a threat for a runaway federal government than we are for a runaway convention of the states.
Well, I think that's a great way to phrase it. People are, I assuming they're more afraid of the unknown than they are of what we actually want to do here, or what you actually want to do here. So when you say that they're afraid of a runaway convention, they think that this organization is going to change the Constitution, or they just don't understand it?
Well, it is aimed at amending the Constitution, but it's not a constitutional convention. It's not something that's going to rewrite the entire document. What it's going to do is, under those three things, propose amendments under those three items, just for amendments. It's not to rewrite the Constitution. And there's a lot of people are spreading disinformation about it. And when I run across people like that, I merely ask them to go onto the Convention of States website, and there's a tremendous amount of information on that website, and just simply educate themselves about the process. Because once you know what the process is, it tends to quell the fears.
Well, let's break it down and try to make it as simple as possible. Let's talk about each initiative individually and talk about the features and the benefits of it. So let's first talk about what I think is the easy one, term limits.
You think that's the easy one? Well,
just makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. The government isn't going to impose term limits on themselves. They're not going to do it. And the only way it's going to get done is if we, the people, use Article 5, which is part of our Constitution that the founders put in there because they foresaw a day like this potentially coming. So by actually instituting the Article 5 Convention of States, we can impose term limits on them because they will never impose term limits on themselves. They're living high on the hog in Washington, D.C.
Well, they sure are. So what is a reasonable term limit for you?
Well, in my opinion, I would say 2 terms as a senator and maybe 6 terms in the House. 12 years is more than enough time to make your mark in Washington, D.C., and then return home to the public life like was intended.
Okay. So term limits, could be a challenge, but what about the budget, spending on the budget?
Spending, look at our deficit, look at our unfunded liabilities. I would love to see a balanced budget amendment, which is definitely a potential under the spending part of this resolution. They're spending like drunken sailors, to coin an old phrase that my dad used to say, and we can definitely rein that in with a convention of the states as well.
Well, you reined it in. We talked a little bit earlier in the news segment tonight about the new Green Deal. And how would the new Green Deal and the Convention of States kind of mold with one another?
Well, they don't really jive very well together. The Green New Deal, I saw Senator Mike Lee did a really, really interesting speech on the floor about the Green New Deal.
We talked about it tonight, yep.
Yeah, I think some of his points were a little bit easier to believe than parts of the Green New Deal itself.
Okay. So what about the third part of the Convention of States? What do people need to know?
Yeah, bringing power back out of Washington, D.C., back to the states where it's intended to be. The central core structure of the Constitution is the separation of powers. And we need to separate Washington from our power. We need to bring the power back to the states, back to our local legislators, back to our local House, our local Senate. And those are the guys that should have all of that power, not the people in Washington. The Constitution delineates a enumerated set of powers that the federal government is supposed to have, and we're way out of bounds on that now. And I really believe we need to bring that power back to the states where we can hold our local representatives much more accountable than we can once they get to Washington, D.C.
No, I personally agree with you. Do you get any pushback on that part of it?
No, I don't get a whole lot of pushback on that part because a lot of people agree that it would be better to have that power more central, more localized here, where we can, they live in our communities for the most part. Mm-hmm. A couple of them don't, but I don't get a whole lot of pushback on that particular topic.
Well, it is the United States of America, and if you don't like what's going on in your state, you have an opportunity to live in 49 other ones. But hopefully, people do like it. So how do people learn more about this? How do they get educated on it?
I would direct people to go to conventionofstates.com, and you can click on the Take Action button, and there'll be a whole series of prompts right there. And I would also encourage people in Massachusetts, in the Senate, it's SD 2290, and in the House, it's H3213. And I would encourage people to just take the time to grab a piece of paper and a pen and write a personal note to their local legislators saying, I support this, and I wish you would support this as well as my representative. The handwritten notes have made a tremendous, tremendous impact on the national level for the Convention of States program. When someone takes the actual time to sit down and write a note, the legislators take notice of that because they realize that that one individual note can represent 10 constituents. And the math speaks for itself when you come down to those kind of numbers.
So how did this initiative get started? And how are you gaining momentum?
It got started with Mark Meckler, and he was for Citizens of Self-Government. Self-Governance, I believe, was the original group that he started. And as far as I know, Mark Levin's book, The Liberty Amendments, kind of kindled a little bit of a spark when people started really taking notice of the Convention of States. And on March 6th of 2014 is when Georgia became the first state. And I truly believe someday that's going to be a history question. Maybe 100 years down the road, they're going to say who was the first state and when did it happen. This is a movement that the grassroots of America really is starting to come together and get this moving. In Massachusetts, we're building the state team at a pretty good clip right now. Right now I have 2 legislative liaisons. I have a state communications coordinator, a state information analyst, a state content writer. The team is really coming together, and the volunteers are coming in spurts. They're flooding in, and we're building a good, strong grassroots movement right here in the Bay State.
Let's talk about some of the feedback you've gotten from our leaders in the Northeast. Positive, negative type feedback?
A lot of them just aren't really familiar with what Article 5 actually is, and the things that they do know seem to be untrue. Or misinterpretations, perhaps, would be a better way of saying it. And the ones that will actually listen, and if you go talk face-to-face with them, they will listen to you, and so will their staff. And we're finding that there's some ears that will listen.
I'm a little skeptical. I mean, I'm sure if we ran this by Elizabeth Warren or Ed Markey or Jim McGovern, I mean, would they embrace this? I mean, I think...
Well, they're the ones that we're going to be neutering. So no, they're not going to embrace it.
Okay.
But our local state legislators who are going to be empowered by this, And I would hope that they'll see the wisdom in that. The founders were very, very brilliant when they crafted the system that we live under. You know, we're a mixture of federalism, republicanism, and democracy. And it's a perfect mixture. And we have separation of powers at every level and in every direction under the Constitution. And I would hope that our local and state legislators would realize that empowering themselves is the way to go here.
We've got a couple minutes left here, and we want to make sure. So we're a couple years away, probably, of getting to the 34 state mark, right? That's probably realistic, right?
That's probably a very realistic assessment. I got a feeling once we get up around 20, it might start picking up steam. But I tell you what, number 34 is going to be a brutal bloodbath of a fight, legislatively speaking, because there are some powerful, powerful forces that are very much against what this is doing right now. I know I don't need to name them out loud to you. You know them already, I'm sure.
So assuming, you know, fast forward in positive thinking, it's a couple years from now, you have the convention and you adopt these 3 amendments. Then what is the process after they've been adopted by the convention? They become law, or do they have to then be vetted?
No. So
Okay.
what actually is going to happen, these 3 parts of the resolution, they can each have as many amendments under them as that come out of the convention. There could be 10 amendments for spending. There could be 10 amendments for limiting the federal government power. There could be 10 amendments for term limits. But only the ones that reach the 38 state threshold. It has to, after the convention, it gets remanded back to the states, and then the 38 states, or 3/4 of the states, have to ratify. So if 3/4 of the states ratify only one of the amendments, that amendment becomes part of the Constitution. That's where this is kept from becoming a runaway. It has to meet the 38 state bar. So no bad legislation is going to pass through 38 states to become part of our Constitution. That's the brilliance of the system.
I was just going to use that. You just stole my line. It's the brilliance of the system, because it's the people are going to decide this. The people are going to decide. Yeah. So
that's right. We the people. We are the people. This is the time, and we are the people.
well, you know, I've got to commend you. I mean, it's not going to be an easy effort, but like you said, maybe Mike Arnold's name's going to show up in a history book one day. So you're making a difference in the world.
I would still encourage everyone, please go to conventionofstates.com, sign a petition. If you have it in your heart, please volunteer, because a grassroots army takes a whole lot of grass and a whole lot of roots.
So once again, tell people how they can get involved, and more importantly, how they can find out more information.
Conventionofstates.com, and click on the Take Action button. And if you're going to write a letter to your legislators, in the Senate, it's SD 2290, and in the House, it's H 3213.
All right. Hey, Mike Arnold, thanks for taking some important time to educate us about this. As you go along in the process, you're always welcome here on Good Night to come back and give us an update, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much. I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you. That's Mike Arnold, of the State Director of the Convention of States.